I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Ehrlich.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Was your dad's birthday?
My dad's 70th birthday.
70th, okay.
Yes.
Happy birthday, belated, or I guess.
Happy birthday, Uncle Mark.
Wait, your dad or Uncle Mark?
My dad is Uncle Mark.
Your dad is Uncle... You call your dad Uncle Mark?
Everybody calls him Uncle Mark.
Including you?
Including me, Priscilla, my friend Liz, all of my friends, my friend Katie.
You don't call him dad?
I call him fodder.
Oh, okay.
Or dad. It says dad in my phone, which is funny. It doesn't say fodder or Uncle Mark. I guess it's
like Uncle Mark.
Maybe like if I'm in an accident, the police can figure out who to call. If it said fodder or Uncle Mark, they'd be like, "Meh, I'm not going to call this person."
That's fair.
No, he's Uncle Mark. I don't know. Aunt Mary's Aunt Mary. Cousin Caroline's Cousin Caroline. Bill's brother Bill. I'm Cousin Aubrey. My dad's Uncle Mark.
Okay, that's cool.
I mean, he's just Uncle Mark.
My cousin Sean is Shawnee Boy. Always has been for me.
Okay, well, cousin Caroline has that alliteration, so it can't. He doesn't have a cousin Shawnee.
Cousin Caroline feels like a character in a sitcom. That feels like an actual. Be like, Raymond is talking to his wife, and he's like, "Deborah, cousin Caroline's coming over." That's my best Raymond.
I mean, that was kind of. I guess it was okay.
Not really.
You know who
I've never tried a Raymond impression.
You know who I like in that show is the brother.
Oh, what is his name?
I don't know, but he's
his name is Gareth in real life. Gareth Edwards? Is that
maybe
what it is?
I don't. He's in a
Robert. His name's Robert in the show.
There's a show called Dead to Me where she's writing obituaries and for a newspaper in Southern California. But then whenever she gets assigned an obituary, the person who she's writing for like appears next to her and she's like talking to the dead person. It's cheesy. It's cute. Anyway, his character, the brother from Everybody's Loves Raymond, is like the owner of the newspaper, and he's like this totally like egocentric douchebag guy, and it's hysterical, and I like that version of him, like that character much more. Anyway, so are we starting?
We are starting.
Wait, did we start?
Yes, we started.
Sorry. Yeah. Hey, well, welcome to the Biographers podcast.
Just the Biographers. We've talked about this.
Oh, sorry. Welcome to the Biographers. It reminds me of the Facebook in the movie Facebook, or what is it? Social Network.
In the movie Facebook.
The movie Social Network, when Justin Timberlake's character is like, drop the.
Drop the. Which, by the way, there was a point, I can't remember what it was. There was something on the internet, on like Reddit years ago when somebody asked for like, oh, I want a title for something or other. And I suggested something. I was like, oh, you should call it The Something. And somebody responded and was like, drop the, it's cleaner. And all these people liked it. And I was like, okay, yeah, fun quote, but you're wrong. My version sounds better with the in front of it. So I don't think it's a universal rule, but I do think it was correct for Facebook.
Okay, well, The Weeknd is cooler than Weekend.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
And that's a guy.
Yeah, or, well, there's a terrible example because I think he's kind of a douche, but The Edge from U2, which, okay. I just have to say this really fast because we will get going, I promise. But if you didn't know this, the guitarist from U2, his name is The Edge.
Legally?
The Edge. I don't know, legally, maybe. I don't know if he's that crazy that he would have done it or whatever. But I was watching this documentary with him at one point, and he's talking about a story between him and Bono. Okay. And he goes, and I was talking to Bono, and we were in the studio and we're recording something or other. And Bono, he comes over to me and he goes, hey, Edge. And I was like, you are full of shit. Bono does not call you Edge. Like, if he does,
maybe
I want to slap all of you. Like, that is insane.
I don't know. I don't really want to shit on U2, but ever since they like sneaky put that song on Apple iTunes, like in your iPod, whatever, it was really weird. It was like suddenly you had a U2 song in it. It was like, this is feeling like indoctrination or something. I'm not really sure.
Look, there are a couple U2 songs I absolutely love that are absolutely incredible. Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For.
Yeah, that's a great.
I think is an amazing song. Great lyrics, great how Brian puts everything together. But I personally think that U2 is amongst the most overrated bands of all time.
I don't know. I don't like have a U2 album at all, and like you couldn't get away from it like when I was in middle school and everything, but like
I can't argue their legacy, But me personally, there's a lot of like,
It's the thing about musicians is that in bands and whatnot is that some people like it and some people don't. But you know what?
Hey,
they're the ones going to the bank.
we can
some people
still
like
be
the
friends.
biographers. Some people don't.
Some people don't. Some people like our
the
incessant
ones
banter
going
that
to the
goes off
bank.
track and squirrels in different directions.
Shiny things.
Some people don't like it.
Some people don't. But actually, I can't remember who it was, but the person who gave us the review that was like, you guys kind of go off topic a little bit too much, but you still gave us 5 stars. Thank you.
You're not wrong either, and feedback taken.
And we have talked about it, even though we're doing it right now. But we'll get to it.
I know.
We'll
And I
get to
try
it.
to edit things out, and I'm getting better at editing things out. So for all of our hopeful fans, as you start to listen more and more and more, we're going to try to keep our mouths shut more.
Focus.
Focus.
But
I did not hear you
not-
say focus the first time.
no,
heard
I
you
know.
say something
There's like
else.
a joke about that.
Oh,
like,
okay.
fuck us.
I was like, oh, wow, that was a dangerous way to say that.
It's a joke. It's like there's a whole video where they're talking about focusing, but it sounds like that. Anyway, this is rated explicit anyway, so whoops.
It's true.
Now we'll focus. Okay, so we're gonna talk about Abigail Adams some more.
Whoop, whoop.
Abigail Adams, the first second lady and the second first lady.
And the second first lady, which was a great name for the first episode of this.
Yeah, it's very clever. I liked it.
So we can do a little recapping.
When we last left off, the Boston Massacre had just occurred. March 2nd, 1770, a group described as a mob, quote mob, of patriots clashed with the British Imperial troops led by Captain Thomas Preston. Amidst the chaos, someone yelled, "Fire!" resulting in the death of 5 Bostonians. Now, although John Adams didn't support the Imperial troops in Boston, he felt that the mob's actions were unjust, and he referred to them as a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish jacktars.
Saucy Boys definitely sounds like a group of very proud gays from the 70s.
I was reading another letter to Abigail just this morning, actually, and he just likes the word saucy.
It's a good word.
It's a great word. It it kind of, when you say it, it's like you have sauce in your mouth. Like it's saucy. Like
Also, this is just a sort of general military question. It seems strange to me that they would call fire to shoot when you could also equally call fire, and it means there's a fire somewhere. So anyway,
I don't know. Didn't they have to literally ignite it though to fire?
no,
back
it's
then?
it's true. I just think it's funny that in that situation somebody yells fire and then they automatically assume it's guns.
I
but,
feel like if
maybe
they're
I'm just being
if
stupid.
they're in a crowded theater, then that might mean one thing. But when you're outside and there's people holding guns and they yell fire, I mean, I
This
don't
is
know.
fair.
I don't know. I guess we could look into the etymology of the word fire in that scenario.
No. We can move
Shall
on.
I say fire one more time?
No.
Fire!
Oh God.
Adams went, John, not Abigail.
Because she wasn't Adams yet, was she?
No, she was.
Oh, they got married already. Okay,
got
that's right.
married,
That's
yeah.
right.
Adams went on to represent Captain Preston, the British general guy, when he was arrested for murder, successfully securing Captain Preston's acquittal. Adams did this in an effort to show that a British officer could actually get a fair trial in the colonies. Most other soldiers were also acquitted, except for 2 who had fired shots killing colonists. They were convicted of manslaughter and branded on the thumb with an M for manslaughter. And this was to prevent a similar charge in the future. So, like, if they were caught up in another situation and they already had the M on it, they wouldn't be allowed to be convicted of manslaughter a second time.
Really? I mean,
Yeah,
I know
they
about the whole
branded them.
double jeopardy thing, but I didn't know that it was that
Double
broad.
jeopardy is for the same actual crime in the moment. This is like, so they were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, which was like not as big of a deal.
Okay.
But like technically it might have been murder. But if it happened again, that's a little suspect.
Oh,
And
so
so-
it was more of a warning
A
to say
warning.
like
So
they're
like
capable.
let's say 10 years later, the same sort of
okay.
thing happened and they were on trial again, then maybe they wouldn't be given the gift of manslaughter and they may actually be charged with murder.
I was
Or convicted
hearing
of
it
murder.
the opposite, as if manslaughter happened again. They were like, "Oh well, he's already got the brand, so we can't bring him in for the same thing." I was like, that does not seem fair, but okay.
No. It was to be like, this guy's got a record because there were no records. Like what?
Yeah.
He's got a record.
I will also say this is of the few things that I knew about John Adams previously is that he defended the British in is it called Bloody Sunday? Is that what we called it? Or is this the Boston Massacre?
Yeah.
That he defended them, and a lot of people hated him for that.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, but justice is justice, and I don't care.
Right.
Basically,
he was like,
which
the
I
law,
thought was awesome.
The law is the law.
Right.
Right. Right. Well, so the practice of branding on your hand was common in the 17th and 18th century in North America, and it was a form of punishment, but it was like a slap on the wrist. It also included a D for drunkenness and A for adultery, which we've heard of, and other brands. But again, because there were there were some records, but like imagine you're over in maybe you go down to Virginia, like they don't have the records about you from when you were in Massachusetts.
It makes me think of strangely Pirates of the Caribbean when they find Jack Sparrow.
A P for pirate.
A P for pirate. It's like you had a run in with that or whatever.
I hadn't thought about that,
Similar.
but I'm sure it's exactly the same thing. Yeah. P for pirate. The trial caused Adams significant stress, and while many townspeople approved of his actions, others felt betrayed by him defending those responsible for the deaths of the 5 individuals. Nonetheless, Adams was rewarded with an election to the Provincial House of Representatives on June 6, 1770.
Nice.
I just want to point out, we're in 1770 right now.
Okay.
We're going to go through a few years.
6 years before the Revolution.
We're going through a few years in this episode. The next spring, John decided to move the family back to Braintree from Boston. So they'd been living in Boston a little bit, only 3 years after moving them to Boston. So he's like, we live in Braintree. Now we're going to live in Boston. Now we're going to go back to Braintree. In a letter to Abigail's cousin, Isaac Smith, remember him, we're going to talk about him quite a few times in this episode. She was the cousin that when they were both younger, she was like, Cousin Isaac, may I correspond with you? And he was like,
yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
So they were friends. And then I read something else too, where like Abigail and her sister Mary, a lot of times you weren't friends with people of the opposite sex at this time. But if it was a cousin, it was like, whatever, you can totally be friends with your cousin.
Which is...
No,
it
wasn't like that. It was more like, the properness of like men and girls and boys shouldn't be fraternizing. But if it's a family member, it's okay. And so that's where she got a lot of her education, because Isaac would get better education and then he would share information with her.
I get it.
I know you're talking about kissing cousins or something.
No, but like in that time, it wasn't exactly uncommon for cousins to marry. So it's just sort of funny for the families to be like,
that is true.
Oh, if you correspond with your cousin, nothing to worry about. And it's like, but like, isn't grandma married to her cousin?
So in a letter to Abigail's cousin, Isaac Smith, John stated that he was so overburdened by the, quote, load of public and private care has sometime oppressed me that he might soon have shaken off his mortal body, saying he was so stressed out by all this business with like defending the guy that he was just like, I may just die if I,
oh my gosh,
like, it may shake off my mortal body.
Gosh.
So I just thought that was funny. It's speculated that John actually wanted to move home to Braintree for practicality purposes. They had this house in Boston. They had a mortgage on it. He could sell it, be out of debt, go back to Braintree where his dad had left him a house, and they could be like living scot-free.
Nice.
He moved him back. Now, at the same time as their move, cousin Isaac was traveling through England. Both John and Abigail would write to cousin Isaac separately. So they both had correspondence with cousin Isaac. Cousin Caroline, cousin Isaac. Abigail confessed that she'd always felt a great inclination to visit the, quote, mother country, and that had nature formed me of the other sex, I should certainly have been a rover. So she like wanted to get out and travel, but she was a woman. She wasn't allowed to.
So this is Abigail saying this to Isaac.
Yeah.
I thought
in
this
one
was
of her
Isaac
letters
to Abigail. I was like, oh, he's like, no, opposite. Gotcha.
Abigail would write, she confessed she'd always felt, yes, sorry. I'm just talking fast probably. She wrote to Isaac that she most certainly would have been a rover. She confessed that her desire to see England had been dampened by the, quote, unnatural treatment with which our poor America has received. So she's like, the mother country's being kind of jerky to us, and I have always wanted to go there, but now I'm a little less interested. She still had a sense of wanderlust, though, and if she could take such trips, she would, but, quote, Women, you know, sir, are considered as domestic beings, and continued to say, even though they inherit the equal share of curiosity with the other sex. So she's just like, we're not really allowed to do anything, but we're really like curious about everything around. And like, we would like to be going on all these trips, but we can't.
That's a fairly sad thing to hear, where it's like,
well, now all these years later.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that historically hearing that and being like, oh, this poor thing is basically saying, I have the same exact yearning for adventure that all of you do, but I have been indoctrinated with this idea that, well, that's just not what women are for. It
wasn't even indoctrinated. It was like,
well, it had to be societally almost.
Well, sorry, indoctrinated almost makes it seem like she believes that she has to stay home, but she's saying, I'm not allowed to go because I am a woman. By society, yes.
Right, and that's what I'm saying.
Society's doctrine.
Her family, whatever,
yes,
has told her from day one that, nope, this isn't your place to do that kind of a thing. And it's like, that sucks.
Yeah. So on Cousin Isaac's travels, he encountered England's renowned female historian, Catherine Macaulay. He gave Macaulay a backhanded comment in a letter to John, a letter that John showed Abigail, and you're going to see this a lot. So they get letters from people, and then like, hey, here's this letter I got from Cousin Isaac. And then they're like, oh, here's this letter I got from so-and-so. And they share their letters with each other. It's just like...
hot goss.
Well, I mean, I guess if someone calls me and tells me something, I'm going to turn to Aaron and be like, guess what I just heard?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Hot goss. So anyway, Cousin Isaac said about the renowned historian Catherine Macaulay, Macaulay is not so much distinguished in company by the beauties of her person as the accomplishments of her mind.
Ooh.
Saying she was smart, but not that pretty.
Hey, I mean, hey, you know, I get it. It's all good.
Yeah, but like, do you really need to mention her looks? I don't know.
I'm probably the same way.
Abigail wrote a letter back to her cousin saying that she had a great desire to meet Macaulay, as she had confounded men's limited expectations of women. So like, men were like, women are not that smart, they're not that intellectual, they're not going to do, and she actually was making a name as a female historian, and so they were like, oh, okay, well, she's smart.
And was it from their perspective, what she's saying is the men are like confounded by her,
yes,
basically intellect?
Yeah, like
cool.
They're confounded by the fact that she's not just a dummy.
Which I would imagine would translate to the guys being like, okay, kind of into this, but
yes,
I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
I don't know, but
yeah. Over the next few years, John's financial prospects had improved, and he was able to buy a big brick house in Boston and eventually moved Abigail and the kids back to Boston again.
Oh, wow.
This included the addition of a fifth child, which was born on September 5th, 1772, named Thomas Boylston Adams, and he'll be referred to as Little Tommy.
Little Tommy. Boylston. That's a interesting middle name.
I think Boylston's like a neighborhood in Boston. In the summer of 1773, Abigail joined John on a trip down the coast to Plymouth and met John's friend James Warren and James's wife Mercy. Mercy Otis Warren would become an acclaimed female poet, historian, and playwright. She had just 1 year before published her first play, which was a satire of the events of the Boston Massacre called The Adulterer.
Adulterer?
Adulatuer. I tried to find a copy of this play. I didn't like buy a printed copy because I spent too much on my next subject and this subject. But it's a political satire play.
Cool.
Now, Mercy Warren was not the cheerful, positive, quiet lady of the times that people would expect. She was actually a bit unpleasant. Abigail began her correspondence with Mercy, and in her first letter started out with pleasantries, some flattery, as was the custom. Mercy replied, saying that while all the praise was because Abigail had a good heart, it was pointless because Abigail was nice about everyone that had not shown, quote, any remarkable instance of depravity to create disgust.
So she's basically saying, like, you're kind of judgy.
No, she actually was saying you're nice to everybody. And unless someone is a murderer, you're going to be nice to them.
I take it as almost like this, knowing that her dad was a preacher, that it's like, unless you can find a sin to point out. I don't know.
I think she was really saying, like, you're going to be polite and proper unless the person has done something literally terrible. Okay. If they're like a little gossipy, you're still going to be polite and proper. You're just going to be, so like, so she's like, it's nice that you're saying all these nice things about me, but you say nice things to literally every other person. So it's not actually nice. I'm not really getting any praise because you'd praise everybody.
So is and I'm sure you're going to go on with this, but is she going to dismiss her, or is that more of like an embrace, or like, let's go on?
So they do become friends.
Okay, cool.
So Mercy showed no mercy. She would look at the dark side of things. Her candid feedback on matters Abigail sought her opinion on prompted Abigail to adopt a more critical and questioning mindset herself. So Mercy was skeptical. Abigail started becoming more skeptical.
Cool.
For instance, when Abigail sent Mercy a pamphlet titled On the Management and Education of Children, which was supposedly written by someone named Juliana Susanna Seymour, but was actually written by a guy named John Hill. So it was like a woman was supposedly wrote this on the management of education of children, but some dude wrote it.
So was it like a pen name to maybe make it seem more attractive for
probably
mothers?
It was probably, it was probably meant to be like, this is coming from the woman's soft heart.
Sure.
Anyway, the pamphlet claimed that a mother's primary duty was to instill generosity in her children. Mercy disagreed. She argued that prioritizing honesty over generosity should be the focus of maternal teaching. And Mercy was kind of blunt, so that tracks. After reading a collection of plays by Molière?
I think it's Molière.
Molière is what I said Molière, and then it sounded weird. After reading that collection of plays, Abigail actually hated them. Emboldened by her friend's honesty, she decided to share her critiques of the plays. However, toward the end of her critiques, she kind of backtracked. She was concerned that her criticism might be seen as vain, especially given Moliere's esteemed reputation. But instead of commending Abigail for her candor, Mercy took a different stance, as she often tended to contradict what other people said. So like Abigail's like, okay, I actually don't like Molière, and I'm going to tell you about it. And then Mercy was like, but Moliere's great. So it's just like, no matter what people said, Mercy Warren was like the opposite.
So she was basically like talking to any Star Wars or Beatles fan ever?
Yes. She was like, oh, you like Star Wars? Star Trek's better. Or Star Wars is stupid.
or going to somebody going, you've never seen Star Wars? Oh man, you gotta watch them. Here are the DVDs or whatever. And then the person comes back and goes, I wasn't the biggest fan of them. That person going, then you're an idiot. I don't know what to tell you.
Anyway, in addition to reviewing and commenting on publications, Mercy was the first person that Abigail spoke with about the conflict between England and the colonists outside of Abigail's family. So she always kept her conversations about the goings on of the festering revolution internal in the family. Okay. And then she started speaking to Mercy about it. She's like, okay, this is my friend and confidant. I'm going to give I'm going to start talking to her about this stuff.
That seems healthy.
Yeah, it does. But I think that maybe, it was kind of like you keep your opinions to yourself. And so she found someone that she thought, okay, I can talk to this person and I can, she's going to play devil's advocate and she's going to push me and have me question my thoughts and get me thinking more deeply about stuff.
Yeah. And I would imagine that as a woman in that time, I would imagine there'd be a lot of men who were, philosophically challenging each other and, yes. we're gearing up for the American Constitution and Declaration of Independence. So you have these guys challenging each other all the time, but you probably don't have a lot of women that are able to do that really. So it seems really cool that this friendship was sort of formed to do that.
Yeah. Able from a education perspective, able from a time, just having the time to sit down and ponder things.
Sure.
And then again, like, Abigail always kind of had this sweet disposition. Yeah, she was a little snarky. Like when she first met John, she's like, this guy's full of himself. But like, and she did, let me point out that she has already and will continue for the duration of their marriage to have thoughtful conversations with John too. Yeah. But having it with a woman was interesting because there's more to come on that sort of stuff.
It's just a different dynamic.
Yeah, different dynamic. Cool. Having it with your friend versus your spouse anyway.
Totally.
Or her father, the preacher, So interesting. And yeah.
No, you and I have different conversations than Kat and I are going to have it, in different capacities, what I mean? And you challenge my thoughts in different ways than Kat's going to challenge my thoughts, so. Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to 1767, the Townsend duties. These were taxes on goods imported to the American colonies, and it had been repealed in 1770. So the Townsend duties were repealed in 1770, all except for the one on tea. This is an important one that we all remember. All of the goods taxed on these duties were ones that the British believed the colonies could not easily make on their own. The tea tax was kept to assert the sovereignty, we love that word from the sovereignty, overrule of England over the colonies. This repeal of most of the duties seemed to calm things down for about 3 years. And this was known as the Quiet Years. And I had a typo. It was 1773. I said 76. I think that was just a typo. No, 1767. No, I'm just dyslexic. 1767, the Townsend duties were put out into the world. They were enacted. Okay. And they were repealed in 1770. All the rabbling chilled out because the only duty left was tea. For those 3 years between 1770 and 1773, people were pretty chill. They were paying their tea tax, but like they were okay. Also, this was because they were smuggling in tea from the Dutch tea company. Oh. And so it was like, okay, like they called it the Quiet Years. They were like, we'll get our tea through other means.
I know it was very serious business at the time, but tea smuggling, it sounds like the cutest smuggling that there is.
It's so cute.
It's adorable.
It's very proper tea.
Like,
it's proper.
Oh, darling, put the tea in your jacket. Like that's what I think of. Anyway,
tea smuggling. In 1773, the British East India Company, which I think most of us might remember from history class, faced significant financial difficulties. Years of mismanagement, corruption, and competition had left the company on the brink of bankruptcy. To alleviate its financial woes, the British government intervened by passing the Tea Act of 1773. The Tea Act allowed the British East India Company to bypass colonial tea merchants and sell its tea directly to the American colonies. This move was intended to help the British East India Company offload its surplus tea stockpiles and generated much-needed revenue. However, it also created a monopoly for the company and angered colonial merchants and smugglers who stood to lose business. So, if the colonists bought taxed tea, then they would be consenting to being taxed. And the Patriots believed that it was important to not establish this precedent. So all this tea, India Company stuff, it was like, we're about to get to a point of no return if we do this. Abigail wrote to her friend Mercy on the topic, stating, quote, "The tea, that baleful weed, is arrived. Great, and I hope effective opposition has been made to the landing of it. The proceedings of our citizens have been united, spirited, and firm." And she's just like, this East India tea is nasty, and I don't like it.
I believe there's a phrase that we used in America. You're probably going to get to it.
Maybe. Well,
no taxation without representation.
Oh, yes. It's funny that never actually made it into this, but yes, taxation without representation is really what all of this is about.
Yeah,
and
taxation without representation.
They were like, we shouldn't be taxed because we're not. So like when the East India Trading Company is like bringing tea in, they are like, we're British citizens. The British citizens don't get that. We shouldn't either.
Right.
Now, as the number of patriots was quickly increasing, Abigail said, "The flame is kindled, and like lightning, it catches from soul to soul." She then predicted that unless the crown backed down, which seemed unlikely, the empire would erupt in, quote, civil war. Now, in December of 1773, Abigail had gone to visit her parents in Weymouth.
That's a weird one still for me.
Weymouth. And was then snowed in by a blizzard. Now, while you could travel by horseback back then, carriages could not make it from Weymouth to Boston. It's unknown if Abigail actually ever rode a horse, by the way. She may have just been in carriages. John had to step up, as all the kids were with him. In letters from the time, Abigail wrote, "Alas, how many snowbanks divide thee and me, and my warmest wishes to see thee will not melt one of them. Her warm wishes should melt the snowbanks."
Oh, that is very poetic.
I know, she's very poetic. She inquired about her children and told John, "Our little Tommy, you must kiss for mama." And I feel gratified with the imagination at the close of the day in seeing the little flock round you, inquiring when Mama will come home, as they often do for thee in thy absence.
It's very Norman Rockwell.
I know, it is. And also she's like, you know, they ask about you when you're gone.
And I think it's probably one of those nudges of like, and I let you know when they ask about you. So maybe...
I mean, I do the same thing when I call about the dogs. I'm like, tell Mama that or tell them that Mama loves them. Do they know Mama's coming tomorrow?
I'm not that way.
It was funny because I came back from Dallas and I was like a day late. I stayed an extra day and the dogs were in rare form on Tuesday night, which was the night I was supposed to be back. And Aaron was just like, I know I told you Mama was coming home tonight. I'm sorry. They were like, "Roar."
Hey, man, you lied to us.
You lied to us. You said Mama was going to be home and she is our favorite human. Okay.
It's funny.
On the night of December 16th, 1773, as Abigail sat home alone, patriots in opposition to the tea, dressed as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 East India Company ships and dumped 340 chests of tea into the harbor. That's the Boston Tea Party, folks.
Which I mean, like, hey, I'm sure they had their reasons and somebody can explain why. But, like, guys, you didn't have to dress up. You probably could have just done it and people would have been just as like, you know, oh, yep, these people dressed, they dumped the tea into the harbor.
Well, it doesn't really make sense because did the Indians like drink the tea?
Right.
I mean, like, I don't know.
And it seems like it was pretty quickly figured out that it was like, these guys aren't Mohawk Indians. These are just white dudes in Boston. So it was a pretty like silly little plan for them to be like, oh, we're going to do it, but make them think that the Native Americans did it. It's like, okay, I guess. Like, how would that have been better? Like,
very, very sneaky.
Right? Like, I don't understand.
I don't know. Now, as predicted by many, including Abigail, the Boston Tea Party escalated the simmering dispute between the colonies and Mother England to a critical point. It's almost like the teapot was boiling and whistling.
Ew.
Although only 50 men attended the party, it's worth noting that hundreds of others watched and cheered from the docks. So like, they knew what was going on.
Oh, so this wasn't even like a covert?
No.
Oh, then doubly why did they dress up?
I don't know.
Okay, whatever.
In response, the British ministry, led by Frederick Lord North, took action. I just like that. Frederick Lord North.
It's nice. It's fun. It's like Jon Snow.
Yeah.
Lord of the North.
Over the following 9 weeks, Parliament passed 4 measures that sent alarm across all of the colonies. Firstly, they closed the port of Boston. Second, legislation was enacted to overhaul the colonial government in Massachusetts, with councillors now being chosen in London. The Massachusetts Government Act, adopted on May 20th, 1774, restricted town meetings to once per year for the election of local officials. Once per year.
Dang.
Next, Parliament passed the Administration of Justice Act, granting special protection to British government officials who could now be tried in England rather than Massachusetts for their crimes.
Huh.
So if they got in trouble, they got sent back to England.
Okay. Oh, like the British.
The British guys, if they got in trouble, were allowed to be sent home to England where they would get a more fair trial.
Oh, yeah, because we can't do it. Yeah, we couldn't do justice.
No. Which is part of the reason that John Adams represented that general guy, because he was trying to be like, no, we can give him a fair trial. I got him acquitted.
Yeah.
But this is a few
years.
No.
We're a bunch of barbarians over here. We couldn't do it.
Well, definitely there was some stuff going on that was making people pissed off. Anyway.
Well, and King George was mad right now.
Everybody was mad.
No, he
was literally mad. He was literally
mad.
Subsequently, the Quartering Act was enacted. The Quartering Act was enacted. Say that 5 times fast. Which compelled owners of empty buildings to offer them to British troops. Now, it said in the book, apparently people would think that the Quartering Act meant you have to house British troops.
Okay.
But it was actually just, if you have an open building, you've got to use that. You don't have to like have your family of 6 in your house and then like give up your bed for a British officer.
But if you have one, you have to offer it to a British officer?
Yes. And
okay.
You would be compensated.
Okay.
So if you owned a building, you would be compensated. However, the money to compensate these building owners came from local revenue rather than the military's funds. So it wasn't like the military was paying them to make their...
They were basically paying for it themselves.
Yes. Well, yes.
Yeah. they were like, oh, yes, no, don't worry, though. We'll compensate you for it.
With your own money that we
with the
took.
pot of money that we've been collecting from you. Right.
Yes.
Like, it's you know.
Yeah, it's a little backhanded. Following this, on June 22nd, came the Quebec Act, which established a government for the land acquired by the British in the Treaty of Paris. However, this act upset the colonists because it permitted the practice of Catholicism. So, like, there was, part of Canada that had been gotten part of the war with the French. And anyway, so like that let people be Catholic. And you know how much these guys don't like Catholics.
Well, because especially the America being founded by Puritans, all wanting to be not part of any type of, what would you call it? Like established church, I guess, Church of England. Or
well, and even the English hated the Catholics. So like it was just, nobody liked the Catholics back then. So anyway, there was a lot going on and a lot of reaction to a lot of things. Now, there were many ideas about how to respond to all of these acts. Radicals saying all trade should be stopped between Massachusetts and England. So like some of them were just like, stop. We're not even doing trade anymore with them. However, cooler heads prevailed, and it was decided that a group of representatives from all 12 provinces should send delegates to a Continental Congress. This would be held in September 1774 in June. Oh, and in June, John Adams was elected by Massachusetts as one of the 5 representatives for the colony.
Nice.
So John's moving on up in politics.
Go, Johnny boy, go.
This proved to be taxing on Abigail. First of all, even though they had been apart for almost half the time they'd been married, they were only a short distance from one another, being able to share letters that were delivered within a day. Like he'd be in Boston or Weymouth or they'd be in, Braintree. It was all like in that little area. So it was like someone was going that way and could carry a letter.
It's almost like when text messaging became a thing and it was like, well, we're long distance, but we text all the time.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah, it was like really not that bad.
Yeah.
But John was about to be 300 miles away in Philadelphia. This would mean the letters would become much more sparse. A large amount of their income came from John's legal practice, which was grinding to a halt. He'd not be there to handle the farm throughout the summer and the harvest, so that would become Abigail's responsibility. John, the delegate to the Continental Congress, was also delegating to Abigail, talking to her about farm management, making sure the farm hands got marsh mud. I think I talked about the fertile soil from the seaway. So to get the marsh mud to fertilize the crops.
Oh, crazy.
She had to get farm tenants to pay their rent, something that he had not been particularly great at. Even though those agreements were written in pounds and shillings, like you owe this much money, actual payment was usually made in work. So they didn't necessarily have to pay money dollars. They could work it off. And John documented who was in arrears and who was due to do work. He also instructed Abigail to cut back on everything by saying, quote, I must entreat you to rouse your whole attention to the family, the stock, the farm, the dairy. Let every article of expense which can be possibly spared retrenched.
It's like how I feel right now.
Yeah.
Not having a job.
He's like, cut back on your spending, honey.
Yep.
So John also made instructions on the children's education. And it's notable that he was worried about some of the subjects that women weren't typically taught being imparted on young Johnny. However, he didn't express any worry about French, as he was confident in Abigail's ability to teach it despite her own self-perceived shortcomings. So remember, she self-taught herself in French.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'm a little bit worried about Johnny learning things that you don't know, but I'm not worried about French because you know French.
Gotcha.
Now, remember Sister Mary and Cranch?
Yeah. Ketchup ranch?
Cranch. But it's with a C. It's okay. He's still Ketchup Ranch.
Okay, but it's made by no. Kraft is with a K.
Nope. Yep.
Dang it. I thought I was onto something there. Nope.
Anyway, they weren't doing so hot financially due to Cranch's less than amazing business sense.
That's right. He had all the bad investments.
Yeah, he just kind of was not that great on it. But he tried.
He tried. Hey.
He tried.
And many entrepreneurs will say it's not about the everyone being a success. It's about you got to keep going. You got to keep going. Even if the next one fails, it's about finding the right one. So, okay.
Yep. Now, at this time, he was fixing old clocks and watches. And with trade restrictions, he was unable to get all the parts he needed. And he was worried in general about money. John was worried in general about money. But there was something about the fact that all of them were fighting against the British together that actually rallied them together to make it through. So it was like, times are tough, but we're okay.
Nothing like a war to bring a country together.
Yeah. Now, on August 9th, 1774, Abigail rode with John up to Boston to see him off to the Continental Congress. She was sad, but noted that she would look forward to Saturdays because that's when the mail would come.
Oh.
Abigail's letters at the time were full of comparisons between classical references of like the Romans and Greeks and the colonists. She hadn't yet, she's very poetic. She hadn't yet heard from John. And on August 19th, so he left on the 9th, around the 9th, she wrote up there. On August 19th, Abigail wrote to John, "The great anxiety I feel for my country, for you and our family renders the day tedious and the night unpleasant." On September 2nd, she bluntly pointed out that the other wives of delegates had heard from their husbands, but John still hadn't written. But she was in good spirits and good health, writing on September 14th, "I enjoy better health than I have done these 2 years." But continued with, "5 weeks have passed and not one line have I received."
Hey, now I feel that. That's pretty lame.
"Do not wait for some traveler headed to Massachusetts. I had rather give $1 for a letter by the post, though the consequence should be that I eat but one meal a day for those 3 weeks to come." So she suspected that John was worried about money, and it's a long way to carry a letter and you'd have to pay.
Oh.
And so she was thinking he just wasn't sending her money because he was being frugal.
Being stingy.
And she was like, "I won't eat as long as I can get a letter."
Oh my gosh.
She's like, or I'd eat one meal a day instead of 3, you know?
Like, it's very beautiful.
Yes. It's like, I just want a letter.
Please, just talk to me.
John finally wrote her on September 16th, so 5 weeks, starting the letter with, "Having a leisure moment while the Congress is assembling, I gladly embrace it to write you a line."
Hey, now, I mean, if I was to give old Johnny Boy a little bit of credit there, I mean, he is literally in the process of helping to form a new government. You're probably pretty jam-packed. You're probably not having, a bunch of extra time to write a letter. That being said, come on, buddy.
You got to write your wife.
What's it going to take you? An hour? You can steal away for an hour. So only so many excuses I can give.
Yeah. In additional letters, Abigail recounted early war incidents that occurred, including some Braintree militiamen moving gunpowder to a more secure location, passing by Abigail looking out the window and asking her if she needed any. And then I think they were like, "Ma'am, do you need any gunpowder?" And she's like, "Oh no, it's in safe hands with you." Like, they were taking it because they were afraid the British were going to find it, and they were like moving it to a more secure location. But she like watched them go by. And it's interesting because she's like in the thick of it. Like, these guys are walking down her street with gunpowder.
Oh yeah, but I mean, Boston, Massachusetts as a state was a complete red zone for the Revolutionary War. So
yes. Okay, so sadly, at this time, Abigail and cousin Isaac had a bit of a falling out.
Uh-oh.
He was siding with Parliament on the dispute with the colonies. He did agree that Parliament had no right to tax American colonists, but he believed that when the colonists destroyed the East India Company's tea, they should have been punished for that. By this time, cousin Isaac was in training to be a minister, and his stance actually put him at risk of being unhirable. So because he was siding with the crown, he was like going to have trouble finding a job as a minister.
You might get into this a little bit more, but something that I guess I didn't find surprising, but it was surprising when I initially learned about it, was the whole concept of American loyalists to the British crown at the time, and that there were a lot of Americans.
We're going to talk a little bit about this.
Okay, cool.
Abigail and Mary implored cousin Isaac to change his stance. Abigail wrote, "You have no doubt a right to enjoy your own opinion, but I query whether your duty calls you to divulge your sentiments circumstanced as you are. Like, you don't have to talk about this like when you're ministering."
Whoa.
Yeah, even if you have your opinion. As a merchant, cousin Isaac's father's business was being heard all of this. So Cousin Mary was just like, reconsider your stance, man. Your own father is getting hurt by this conflict. And obviously you're on the wrong side. But this was just an example. Houses were divided. Husbands and wives. Sometimes men would attempt to pledge their family to the crown, and their wives would surprise them with their patriotic principles. Abigail observed an awkward social situation related to a husband and wife. September 16th, she and Nabby were at a formal dinner with her cousin, Hannah Quincy. Hannah's husband, Samuel, was a loyalist. Abigail wrote to John telling about this event. Mr. Sam's wife said she thought it high time for her husband to turn about, and he had not done half so clever since he left her advice. The next year, Samuel Quincy actually boarded a ship to England in exile, and his wife, Hannah, stayed behind.
Whoa.
Of this, Abigail wrote, Mr. Quincy's so secret departure is matter of various speculation. Some say he's deputed by the Congress, others that he has gone to Holland, and the Tories say he's gone to be hanged.
Whoa.
But yes,
crazy.
people would bail.
That is crazy. I mean, we won't get into it a whole bunch, but I can only imagine at the time it was a scary thought of, oh, we are these little colonists over here, and it's the British Empire. Okay. If we decide we don't want to be a part of this anymore and they come to do war with us, it's going to be an intensely scary situation.
Well,
so I can imagine that being scary.
And they're on another continent. It hasn't been long established.
Right.
And so they the clock parts, there's no like clock factory over there.
Right.
They're having to import things because of like the physical nature of where they are. And then also it's just like all these people over there in palaces on the other side of the pond are deciding things about us. They know nothing about what we need. And there was that too. So it's just like, it's definitely an interesting situation. But remember, like the British military was there. They were already there.
Oh, yeah.
Not all of them, but a lot of them.
I would also just really quickly say that I would imagine, too, that the people in the colonies at the time, there was probably a pretty strong sense of like connection to the British Empire in a weird way, because it was probably most oftentimes 1, 2, 3 generations that had been in America so far. So it was, I would imagine there was a sentiment of like, whoa, everybody, let's not get crazy here. These are our like countrymen to an extent, like these British people.
We're going to get more into all of that. But remember,
Okay, cool.
Abigail was like, I would love to go back to Mother England.
Yeah.
But also I'm a little pissed at Mother England.
Totally.
Right now. And back, she was not born in Mother England, so I'd like to go to Mother England.
Like, as in, it's her heritage.
Yes,
I hear that.
Back to her roots. Now, this defiance of your husband was new at the time. You didn't do that. So Hannah Quincy being like, I'm not going to stand with you, husband, and then him leaving was like pretty interesting.
It's pretty metal. I like it.
As a woman, you didn't come up with your own ideas about how things should be done. Abigail was obviously pretty strong-minded. John had been encouraging her to close his Boston legal office because by the time of the fall of 1774, General Gage of the British Army had turned Boston into an armed camp, adding cannons to Beacon Hill and trenches in the streets. So in Abigail's view, there was no practicality in picking up everything from the Boston office and taking it 10 miles back to Braintree, which is what John wanted. He was like, close my office. Nobody's there, except somebody was. He had 2 law clerks there. So if it seemed that way, like just pack it up and go from John's position all the way in Philadelphia, Abigail was like, They lacked storage for all the documents and legal books that they had. John had his 2 law clerks in Boston. They were unpaid apprentices living rent-free with their families in Boston.
Oh my gosh.
If the office moved, they wouldn't be able to work because they wouldn't be able to find housing at all, not even affordable. Everybody was leaving Boston, so Braintree was kind of overrun.
Oh, wow.
And so they couldn't afford to rent any place even if they could have found it. And so on October 16th of that year, Abigail just informed John, you mentioned the removal of our books, etc. from Boston. I believe they are safe there. Effectively ending the discussion.
It's like a nice way of just saying, nah.
Yeah, I'm not dealing with this right now. I've got marsh mud and tenants not paying, and I don't have to deal with this.
Barely a letter from you.
And
So
barely a
my
letter from
guy,
you.
I'm going to leave your legal documents in the office.
Uh-huh. Now, Abigail also made decisions about education. Previously, education had been a shared responsibility between parents, but in this time, educational decisions were switching more to the wives' decision-making. So before it was shared, she didn't actually send John Quincy to the schoolhouse in town. She actually had him tutored by another of John's law. He had a lot of law clerks, who was also her cousin. She had a lot of cousins named John Thaxter. So there was a schoolhouse, and it was like, you should send your son to the schoolhouse. She was worried about like the level of education he would be getting there. She was worried about the other kids being a bad influence on him. And she just kind of said, you're getting homeschooled by cousin John Thaxter, who's also he's got a law degree, probably from Harvard, because everybody did.
It makes me think that his last name is actually Thackeray, but he's super cool. So he just calls him the Thaxter.
The Thaxter.
Hey, what's up? It's the Thaxter.
Well, that's making me think of Thackeray Binks in Hocus Pocus. Anyway, sorry. Which was in Salem, Massachusetts. So
that's right.
Not far away. And also is fake, because it's a Disney movie. Hocus Pocus. Okay.
Well, Hocus Pocus is fake, but Salem is a real place.
I know, but Thackeray Binks.
Yes.
Binks, the cat. He was, a child in a cat's body.
Wait. There was no magical talking cat.
I'm sorry. Spoiler alert.
In real life, what? Okay, we can move on.
John finally got back to Braintree on November 9th. So he'd been gone, September, October, November, 3 months.
Okay. August, though, you said he left.
Well, I'm sorry. I did 1 month is September, October, November to count 3 months.
Gotcha.
I skipped the August because August doesn't count because that was the day he left. Anyway,
okay.
During his time in Philadelphia, he'd begun correspondence with the pro-American historian Catherine Macaulay, who we mentioned earlier. Abigail had been interested by Macaulay, and when she learned about her from cousin Isaac, because of Abigail's new position as the wife of a congressman, she felt the courage to write Macaulay herself.
Nice.
Abigail actually introduced Macaulay to the phrase that Patrick Henry would eventually popularize, one that we all know. The only alternative, which every American thinks of, is liberty or death.
Ooh, that was Abigail?
She didn't write it, but she told Macaulay that phrase, and then it became extremely popular. So she kind of was like, this is a phrase, here you go. And then Macaulay was like, yeah, that's a great phrase. And then Patrick Henry was like, this is a phrase. And then everyone was like, this is the phrase.
It's liberty or death?
Yeah, liberty or death.
That's pretty metal, dude. Yeah. Abigail was kind of metal.
She was pretty metal. She also continued to correspond with her friend Mercy Warren, whose husband James was also a patriot agitator. Mercy's letters had frequently referenced British colonial society's restraints on women, which was something that Abigail was very passionate about. Abigail requested that Warren share her letters between their mutual hero, Catherine Macaulay, because they like to share each other's letters. And Warren agreed as long as she could see Abigail's letters to Catherine Macaulay. So they're just like, oh, what did she tell you? What did she tell you?
Hey, you show me your gossip, I'll show you mine.
I don't think it's all gossip. It's like poignant thinking too.
I know. But
it's like, it's funny because it's like, oh, let me show you this letter I got.
Totally.
Now, you might remember that before Abigail and John got married, Abigail had called herself Diana in her letter. She was like, I'm your Diana. But after the marriage, Abigail started signing her own name because she thought pen names seemed a little childish. However, at the time, letters to John had the potential to be intercepted by enemies. So Abigail took on a new pseudonym. And this one is kind of also metal. Portia.
Just Portia?
The name Portia came from her friend Mercy Warren, who had written to her about Roman heroines.
Okay.
Brutus, who was the lead assassin of Julius Caesar and was a revered figure among many American patriots, was married to Portia. Portia supported her husband in his actions against Julius Caesar by displaying strength, resilience, and loyalty. She also engaged in political discussions with Brutus, displaying concern for his well-being, and ultimately proving her loyalty by swallowing burning coals, demonstrating her inner strength and determination, and proving her trustworthiness to her husband.
Did she live?
So this is contested as to whether she actually did this or not.
Okay.
Most people believe she didn't.
How could you swallow
in the stories
a
of
burning
her?
coal?
So I think it's actually in the Shakespeare play, but then historians say, she didn't do this. Some people say she did it. I've got a little note here. After Brutus died in the summer of such and such. Another one said, no, she just died of the plague. And this is a totally. So anyway, but like whether true or not, it was a symbol of the strength of a strong wife who was committed. And
I would imagine to an extent, a comparison of we're up against the Roman Empire.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. The British Empire was effectively
the
that.
new Roman Empire. And so there was probably this element of, you know, I mean, whether or not it was correct, I really don't know the political history of it. You know, the Senate or whatever it was in ancient Rome killing Kaiser. I learned that recently. It's not Caesar.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it'd be Julius Kaiser is what it is.
So Kaiser salad.
So the Caesar salad was actually invented by a man named Caesar in like the 1940s or something
I'm
like
just
that.
joking.
But anyways,
and it was because he only had some random ingredients and he threw them together and that's how he made it, is what I heard.
I don't know that.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know
like
that.
he needed to make a salad and he just kind of like.
I thought that was the Cobb salad because I make a joke about that in
I
Curb.
think it was the Caesar dressing because that's why it has like sardines in it or something. I don't know.
Well,
Anyway,
happy accident. Either way, it doesn't matter.
Tell us more about Kaiser dressing if anyone knows.
No.
Now I'm just doing that on purpose to bother you. Keep going.
Oh my gosh. No, all I was going to say is that it's like making this comparison again to the Roman Empire. And it seems like Abigail saying almost, John, you might have to be a Brutus here in taking down this empire for the good of the rest of the empire almost. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's pretty darn interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that about the name Portia. I think it's pretty cool.
I didn't either. That's
Portia's a metal name.
And it also makes me like now think of the car manufacturer and being like, oh, the wife of the guy who assassinated.
Yeah, but I don't know
if
mean,
that's where
it's
it came from.
Portia.
Oh, Portia. Oh,
Portia.
okay. Interesting. Okay. Fair
Portia.
enough.
Not Porsche.
SCHE.
Yeah. Anyway, now, after all of these years of mounting conflict on both sides, the British and Americans had really agreed they didn't want to go to war. That's why this was like dragging out for so long. They didn't really want to go to war. But on the evening of April 18th, 1775, British troops crossed the Charles River on their way to Concord. They were going to get some arms and ammunition that the Patriots had hidden in Concord. So they got some intel that there was some stuff over there in Concord and they were going to go get it. When the troops arrived in Cambridge on the way, they asked professors and students how to get the rest of the way to Concord. We need directions, sirs. But nobody seemed to know. Just asked a bunch of people. They're like, I don't really know how to get to Concord.
Education there is overrated.
Uh-huh. So they were definitely trying to block the troops. But the British kept asking around and finally got someone who was willing to tell them who. Or where they were going. Can you guess who it was?
I mean, I want to say Paul Revere.
No.
Because that doesn't make any sense.
It was Abigail's cousin Isaac Smith.
Oh, snaps.
Cousin Smith was like, this is how you go to Concord, because he was a loyalist. Now, while all this misdirection was taking place, the Lexington militiamen kind of like showed up to observe. And they were only to shoot the redcoats if the redcoats fired first. So they were just kind of like, we're here, enforcers a little bit.
Okay.
As the British marched on, a young British lieutenant named Jesse Adair remembered an important rule of combat. Never let your enemy get behind you. So they're walking away and the militiamen are back there. So he took the troops toward the Lexington militiamen. And even though the colonists were complying with the British officer and everything was going okay, a shot rang out. It could have been a nervous soldier. It could have been intentional, but nobody saw. And it's one of the great mysteries of history. It's what Ralph Waldo Emerson called the shot heard round the world.
Ooh.
The Redcoats killed 7 Americans and then marched on to Concord, where another skirmish occurred. This was the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Abigail wrote to her friend Mercy Warren, What a scene has opened upon us, such a scene as we never before experienced, and could scarcely form an idea of. O Britain, Britain, how is thy glory vanished? How are the annals stained with the blood of the children?
Jeez.
And I had to look up annals because it just means like history.
Yeah.
I was like, that word's a little close to another word.
You never heard annals?
I mean, I guess I have, but I was like reading it slowly. You know, it's kind of thing you just like read quickly and you're like, nah, whatever. And I was like, I'm just Googling this anyway.
It's like if I was ever to do like a fake, like, epic speech about something like, through the annals of history, few times have humans, like the chronicles and accounts and whatnot. Okay. Right.
Anyway. But again, Abigail being quite poetic.
Good word.
Stained with the blood of thy children.
And I'm sure we're going to, see a little bit more of this as it goes on. But it does feel like to me, the American Revolution was the turning point in a weird way for the British Empire I could be totally talking out of my butt about that. It just feels like it was a really, really rough defeat. And though there was a lot of British imperialism that continued on.
Yeah, because Queen Victoria was doing pretty fine.
Exactly. But it just feels like there was only about 100 and some odd years left of that before it was like, now it's going down. But anyway.
Well, yeah, I feel like it went up and then back to, I don't know.
That's fair. That's probably a better way to describe it. Anyway, we can continue.
Now, days later, on April 24th, John was elected to the Second Continental Congress and left for Philadelphia, this time for an unknown amount of time and during a war.
Ugh.
A few months later, in June of 1775, Abigail wrote requesting John send her a shipment of pins, P-I-Ns, for sewing.
Oh, okay.
Pins were a commodity typically imported through the British and were scarce during the war. This was her attempt to become a merchant. Now, Abigail astutely noticed that the price of pins had nearly tripled and thought this was an opportunity to turn a bit of a profit. John found her, quote, 2 great heaps of pins. I just thought that was funny. 2 great heaps of pins in July and promised to bring them when he came home next, which we know is like, we don't know when that is.
Yeah.
So Abigail said she couldn't wait and replied on July 16, quote, not one pin is to be purchased for love nor money. I wish you could convey me 1,000 by any friend traveling this way. John got her pins a few days later.
Oh, good. I was so worried that it was going to be like, and she waited for those pins for 7 more years.
I read something like many chapters later in my book too, and it was like she was still pin stuff. Now, I've never seen 1776. What's the musical? The John Adams musical? Not
John Adams?
Yeah, there's a John Adams musical.
Is there?
Yeah, hold on.
I didn't know that.
Have you ever seen Grace and Frankie?
No, Kat has, and she says it's really, really funny.
Okay,
but I've not seen it.
So, I think maybe I'm crazy. We may have to edit this out because I feel like I'm talking. No, it's 1776. It's a musical. It's based on the events leading up to the signing of the Declaration of Independence and telling the story of the efforts of John Adams.
I did not know that.
So at the end of Grace and Frankie, Martin Sheen's character is playing John Adams in 1776.
Oh, that's cool.
So I've never seen it. And I was trying to find like a clip on YouTube because apparently there's a song about Abigail and her pins. But I don't know. I could be wrong, but I want to see 1776 now, especially after reading all of this.
That would be such a deep cut reference for that musical. Like they actually figured out that she was super into him and were like, we got to write a song about this.
We got to write a song of these pins. Anyway, the day after Abigail wrote that letter, June 17th, she and John Quincy woke up to the sound of shelling and climbed up Penn's Hill behind their house to see what was happening. They were able to see what was to become known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was only about 10 miles away. They couldn't tell who was winning, but they knew that the battle was major because of all the sounds and all the smoke.
Sure.
The Battle of Breed's Hill, which was mistakenly named after neighboring Bunker Hill, was the first major battle of the war. Now, I did read something that said the people who live at Breed's Hill, like the Breeds, are like
the Breeds.
They're like upset in history. Now, I don't know. It was one of those more like history blog things, so I'm not sure if it's truly.
So wait. Help me piece this together.
There were
really
two
quick.
hills next to each other, Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill.
Okay.
They the battle was really
On Breed's Hill?
Breed's Hill, but they mistakenly were naming it Bunker Hill. And there was some confusion about which hill. And I got a little confused trying to read the confusion, which is probably why they got confused and named it Bunker Hill. But it was actually technically the Battle of Breed's Hill.
You know, sometimes journalists have to take a little bit of liberty when they name things, because the Battle of Bunker Hill sounds awesome. The Battle of Breed's Hill sounds, like a battle.
I don't know if that's it. I think there was something about, this is something I read the other day, and I can't, don't quote me completely, but the battle plan said Breed's Hill, but then I don't know. People got confused. They were on one of those hills, and the battle ended up being called Bunker Hill.
I feel like there has to be
like a marketing spin.
Not even just marketing, just the local newspaper, whether it was a mistake or on purpose, were like, oh, the Battle of Bunker Hill, and then there it was. It was done.
I don't know. Maybe everybody was mad at the Breeds or something for some reason.
Maybe
they liked the bunkers. Anyway, it was the first major battle of the war. The other stuff it was just skirmishes. This was the first major battle.
Okay.
It was also a shocking show of gumption on the part of the Patriots.
Shocking show of gumption.
General Gage, commander of the British troops, had fought alongside many of the American soldiers in the war against France. And he said, quote, "These people I'm saying in the Old English, shew a spirit and conduct against us that they never shewed against the French."
Shewed as in showed.
Yeah, yes, but it's SHEWED is how he spelled shewed. So anyway, he was like, these guys are fighting harder for themselves than they were against the French.
God, that's weird. Why would you fight harder for yourself than for somebody else?
Why? Despite capturing Breed's Hill, the British took heavy losses. 228 British soldiers died and nearly 900 were wounded. It turned out to be the bloodiest battle of the war for the Redcoats. On the American side, there were 100 losses. Sadly, one was Dr. Joseph Warren, Mercy Otis Warren's brother-in-law, who had become a close friend of John and Abigail's. This was also the last big battle to take place in Massachusetts, though Abigail observed and reported on many small skirmishes in the area throughout the rest of the time. But isn't it crazy that we talked about, these guys are walking down the street and they're like, here, do you need some gunpowder? And then she just wakes up to the sound of bombs and bomb shelling.
Yeah.
And she can see this battle. She was in the thick of it.
That's insane. Or cannon fire, probably the appropriate.
Yes. There was another. I wrote this up and then I was like, this is too complicated. There's an island out in the bay called Long Island, but not Long Island, New York.
Okay. And
there was another thing where the Patriots, the loyalists or the British were out there and they were getting hay off of they needed hay for their animals. And so they snuck onto this island to get the hay, and then they were sleeping, and then the Patriots came and jumped them and then captured him. And then it was so close though that people on the shore could hear them all yelling at each other. And Abigail wrote to John about that. So she's just there's just a lot going on. And she was documenting it.
In the thick of it. That's crazy.
On June 17th, the Continental Congress elected Virginia Congressman George Washington to lead the Continental Army. John Adams had wanted someone from Virginia to dispel the rumors that the New Englanders were the only colonists fighting against Parliament.
Oh.
And he personally put Washington up for the nomination.
No way. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. Right after being chosen, General Washington set out for Cambridge and arrived in early July. He then received a visit from the wife of the man who nominated him. Abigail wrote, quote, "I was struck with General Washington. You had prepared me to entertain a favorable opinion of him, but I thought the one half was not told to me." She was just you didn't really play him up enough. He was amazing.
Oh, wow. Okay. Jeez.
Dignity with ease and complacency, the gentleman and soldier look agreeably blended in him. Modesty marks every line of his features, of the features of his face. Now, she also met General Charles Lee, who was a British general that had defected to the American side. She was less impressed with him. And she said, quote, General Lee looks like a careless, hardy veteran. The elegance of his pen far exceeds that of his person.
Oh, much better writer than he is in person.
Yeah. Regardless of her opinion, he became Washington's second in command.
Crazy.
Which does make sense. If you have someone that kind of knew the British military, you would like maybe want that guy to be like giving you intel.
This also sort of strangely reminds me similarly of when Ian Fleming had lunch with Sean Connery for the first time. And then Ivor Bryce's like cousin or whatever it was like, dude, I'm telling you, this is the guy.
You need him.
This is, wow, he's the one. It feels like it's Abigail with George Washington. Be like, dude, yup, you nailed it.
Yeah, you nailed it. Abigail enjoyed making her reports to John, saying, I say there is a degree of pleasure in being able to tell the news. However, John wasn't writing her very many letters, and she replied to him with, quote, your letters let me know that you exist, but some of them contain scarcely 6 lines. I want some sentimental effusions of the heart. And then she proceeded to guilt trip him and describe that her children were wanting more letters from Dad as well.
Hey, I mean, it's pretty fair, you know?
Fair.
I mean, look, the revolution's happening, but come on, buddy.
You can write letters.
Yeah, you write letters.
But they could be confiscated, so.
That's true.
But still. I mean, he could be like, oh, dear Abigail, I love you so.
Right.
You're
like,
saucy minx.
I don't have time to write you a long letter, but I wanted you to know that I'm thinking of you and the children. I hope you're well. The end. Like, it could be.
Scarcely 6 lines.
Yeah.
Anyway, she wanted more letters.
But that was even if he did those, dude, come on, John, get a stack of paper out, write a bunch of them, date them a couple days apart, and now you're ready to go. Because if I'm not trying to be
batch your letters,
I'm not trying to be mean, but if you are so busy that you can't write to your family, and they just want more consistency from you, make it easy on yourself. Create a plan, create a process.
He was a little busy.
I'm just saying.
Anyway. In addition to the little guilt trips and pushes to have him come home sooner, she had no problem advising him on national policy. She would give her opinion about changes in the structure of the Continental Congress, cautioning that if so-and-so resigns, then such and such will happen. But then I think she realized she was maybe a little overly direct, and she would sometimes say something like, but this is out of my sphere. I only say what others are saying and what the general disposition of the people is. She said in a later letter, my pen is always freer than my tongue. I have wrote many things to you that I suppose I could never have talked.
I feel like that's the case for a lot of people oftentimes.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because she's done this a couple times. Like she was like, Molière sucks. And then she's like, but also let me backtrack a bit on that. So she kind of like runs her mouth. And then it's funny though, because it's like a letter. She could like cross it out or something, I guess.
I mean, I gotta be honest with you. It kind of reminds me of me.
Yeah, I know. Me too.
In that I'll be like, I'll have a strong opinion on something and then I'll go, but don't let that dissuade you from liking it. I'm just passionate about my opinion. I don't think anything less of you for liking Taylor Swift, for example. She's fine. Like, she's just not for me. It's one of those situations where you're like, hey, look, just because I have this opinion doesn't mean that I hate you or something. You know what I mean? I don't know. It feels similar. I think it also had to do with her station as a woman. She was like, I have all these opinions, but also I'm not really supposed to have opinions. So, but that wasn't exactly my opinion. It was other people's opinions. Okay, so this is interesting. In a unique turn of events, Abigail found herself in a conversation with some captured British Marines. John himself would never have a conversation with any prisoners of war during the revolution. But Abigail paid these Marines a visit and recounted in a letter to John that she said, I told them it was very unhappy that they should be obliged to fight their best friends. They said that they were sorry. They hoped in God, and end would be speedily put to the unhappy contest. It's a mouthful.
Yes. They've been sent because someone behind a desk in Parliament said that the Marines in Boston needed to be rotated out. And she said, quote, when they came in a way that their duty to relieve Admiral Montague, who that was, with no thoughts of fighting. So like, they didn't even know that they were really coming to fight. They just were like, you know, I don't know, in the reserves or something, and they'd been sent over. So after this interaction, she had some conflicting emotions and allowed herself to feel some compassion for those prisoners and redirected her anger at British politicians. Apparently, officers had also incorrectly accounted that patriots were executing prisoners, even though Abigail's account, Americans had the policy of nursing their enemies back to health.
Huh.
Remember her uncle Cotton Tufts?
Yes.
Yeah, he was a doctor. he had, quote, dressed their wounds. So she saw her uncle tending to these wounded soldiers.
Okay, so it's probably just rumor.
Yeah, it was
Or propaganda. Hey.
Given all this reporting on the war, forming her own opinions, and giving them to John, Abigail, along with her friend Elizabeth Wells Adams, who was the wife of Samuel Adams, began to call themselves sister delegates. Because he was a delegate, so she was a delegate.
Cool. It's like almost like a precursor to a first lady or something.
Abigail fretted over what John would think of her giving herself the title of delegate. She wrote to him, "Why should we not assume your titles when we give you up our names?"
Ooh. I mean, hey, if we compared it to British society, it's like when lords and ladies.
Lord and lady.
Same thing. I get it.
Yep, it makes sense. In July 1775, John sent the happy news that there would be a brief recess of the Continental Congress until September 5th. It was incredibly hot in the summer, and the delegates really needed to escape the heat of Philadelphia. And I'll just say as a side note, I have never been as hot as I was in the summer in New York City, which is very similar to Philadelphia. It is that East Coast humidity, and it is unrelenting.
So I have spent summer in New York before, and it was very, very hot. But if you have not been to Georgia in the summer, dear, sweet, funky Moses.
I do believe you. I'm just saying that even though it's kind of north, watch out. It's hot. And remember how much clothing they wore?
Oh, yeah.
And there was no air conditioning.
Oh, yeah.
Heck, when was electricity invented? There were no fans, probably.
Yeah, well, let's think Edison. Edison was at a point where we were getting into early video. So we're about 100 years out from electricity.
Okay. So there was going to be a brief recess. As Abigail wrote a response to John, she found out that John's brother, and we hadn't talked about John's siblings, but Elihu, Elihu, had come down with dysentery and died days later. John headed back to Massachusetts, but first stopped in Watertown, west of Boston. And for the next 3 weeks, spent most of his time in Watertown visiting his family on the weekends. By Monday, August 28th, Abigail said goodbye to John and started another separation of an unknown length. At this point, dysentery had made it to the Adams household, starting with a farmhand and then 2 days later with Abigail herself. After a few days, she started getting better, but only very slowly, kind of like me with this cold, except this is much preferable to dysentery, only to be rewarded with 2 border girls becoming sick, a servant, and their son, Tommy. Abigail continued to write letters to keep John updated on the situation at home. Apparently, he was back in Watertown, and she didn't know this, or she would have sent for him. He just didn't write her back, and she replied how sad she was that he had, not actually left a letter for her before he even left. Now, I was thinking about this, though. What if she had figured out that he was in Watertown and sent for him, and he'd come back and gotten dysentery and died? How would that have changed the course of American history?
That's an intense thought, dude.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
What if that was like a movie plot that we made?
That is a really cool alternative history, fictional thought. That's really, really fascinating. It's like the butterfly effect. You know what I mean? It's like if some little teeny thing had changed, who knows? That's wild.
Yeah. Well, in times like these, dysentery times, you would
in the dysentery times.
There's so much Oregon Trail running in my head right now. You have died of dysentery.
All I think of is Christopher Walken from Pulp Fiction. He's like, the old man, he died of dysentery.
I just visualize the yellow and brown black of Oregon Trail, and they always die of dysentery. Anyway. In times like these, you would turn to your neighbors for help, but all the neighbors' families were sick as well. It was an outbreak. Abigail recounted the time saying, quote, "So sickly and so mortal a time, the oldest man does not remember."
Ugh.
The oldest guy around can't remember it getting this bad. On September 8th of the year. So he just left on August 28th. And then this is just a couple days later. Young Tommy was getting better, but the servant girl, Patty, was not. Abigail said, this is so gross. "A general putrefaction seems to have taken place within her intestines." And she continued on that the stench was so overpowering that the family could not bear the house despite constantly cleansing it with hot vinegar.
Oh,
Also,
gosh.
hot vinegar.
I'm honestly, I'm imagining that combination of smells, and it's pretty revolting.
It's a lot of, yeah. 8 Braintree residents had died of dysentery in just the previous week.
Jeez.
Abigail said, the desolation of war is not so distressing as the havoc made by the pestilence.
Pestilence is such a bad word.
Yeah. And it's accurate because more soldiers died of dysentery than from the battlefield.
Really?
In the war. Like more disease and other things took out soldiers than actual war wounds.
Oh, I guess that makes sense because even if you get like a bullet wound that's not necessarily lethal, if it gets infected, you're done.
Yeah, but I think they're saying like they were outside the battlefield and then someone get dysentery and everyone's just like shitting their brains
just
out.
General diseases, you're saying, not even like results of wounds.
Yes.
Whoa, that is intense.
Then Abigail's mother, Elizabeth Smith, contracted dysentery.
No.
Elizabeth had been visiting daily because remember she used to go out every single day.
It was like 4 miles or something like that.
She would go see all of her constituents in the church, her parishioners. So she'd been visiting daily to help with all of the sick people in Abigail's house. Unfortunately, she contracted the disease herself. She continued to help and take care of everyone around her despite her own illness, but ultimately passed away on October 1st of 1775.
Ugh.
Despite this sacrifice, little Patty died 8 days later.
But little Patty was a servant girl,
Yeah, she wasn't one of their family members, but it is said that she'd lived there her whole life.
Oh, so she was like kind of like pseudo family. That's really sad.
Devastated by the loss of her mother, but carrying on, Abigail took up her war reporting again only a few weeks later, sharing with John the British destruction of the town of Falmouth, Massachusetts on October 17th. Abigail attributed the destruction of all these people to God's wrath, saying, quote, "We have done evil, or our enemies would be at peace with us. The sin of slavery, as well as many others, is not washed away." So she was in a dark place, and she's like, God is smiting us.
Jeez.
She also wrote to John that despite moving on, quote, "My evenings are spent with my departed parent. I then ruminate upon all her care and tenderness, and I am sometimes lost and absorbed in a flood of tenderness." I guess she said tenderness twice. Maybe misquoted her, but in a flood of something. She and her father, Reverend Smith, were still in shock, and she said, quote, "It makes my heart ache to see him, my father, and I know not how to go to his house, and that he had, quote, lost almost as much flesh as if he had been sick."
So they're both really depressed.
He wasn't sick, but he just couldn't eat, and he was so sad. And it's funny because I was thinking about the parallels between how much Victoria despised her mother growing up, but then in her later years actually loved her mother. And remember how Abigail was like, my mom's a helicopter mom. She won't let me do anything. And then like Abigail had, 5 children total. And like her mother came every day and was there and taking care. And then now her mom's gone. She's sad.
Yeah, and I'm sure that her
mothers and daughters.
Yeah, having her kids of her own, and then going like, well, now I understand my mom better.
Now I understand why my mom was. So now that
she's gone, and I didn't have the chance to, I'm sure, say thank you and all the things that she wanted to say, and it's tough.
Well, and I read too that like the day she died, it was like Sunday, and so Abigail and her father like went to church because he had to preach, and then like they came back, she held on, but like she died.
That's really sad.
Yeah. So John did try to console Abigail in a letter on October 29th, and he talked about how Elizabeth Smith and how her, quote, talents and virtues had been too much confined to private, social, and domestic life. He'd wished that she'd been able to share her gifts more broadly, but as a woman, she couldn't. And these were really kind words for Abigail, who'd always kind of grappled with the limits of women in society. He also went on to praise Abigail directly. So he's like, your mom was wonderful. I wish she could have done more but she did so much. But, he said about Abigail that he wanted all 4 of their children, including the girls, to be trained in geography and geometry, which were typically only taught to boys. He said that Abigail should teach the children herself. And, quote, I must entreat you, my dear, to teach the elements of those sciences to my little girl and boys. No doubt you were well qualified for a schoolmistress in these studies. Apparently, an Englishman who'd visited Abigail in Braintree and then later met John told John about Abigail that she was the most accomplished lady he'd ever seen since he'd left England.
Wow.
So Abigail had always been really insecure about her education, and John's like, you're really smart, teach our children.
That's awesome.
Teach them stuff that you didn't even get taught.
John Adams is one of these guys that as I'm like learning it through the lens of Abigail, I can't quite figure out, because there's this part of me that's sort of like, oh, well, you know, the duty of your nation called you, and as a result, you're kind of a lousy husband. But then he has these moments of being a fantastic husband and a very progressive, like supportive husband, encouraging husband. So it's interesting to learn about.
I think that it's probably hard to, I mean, it's obvious. First of all, Captain Hindsight is one of my favorite things, but it's hard for us to maybe imagine I can imagine like a busy day where I'm like, I can't answer my phone and I like put it on mute, or not responding to a text or something. But like, it was kind of a process. You had to like sit down and get your quill and your ink, whatever the thing is called.
For sure.
And then you had to write out your letter, and then you have to think of things to say. And if you have to kind of write it slowly, and it's like a process. And then you have to go find someone who can carry it 300 miles away to your wife, and that's trustworthy, and that's not going to let it get intercepted. And so there's a lot.
Yeah, and that's what I mean, is that it's,
I know,
like
it's
the
weird.
duty of the nation, where you're like, yes,
yeah.
But then at the same time, it's like, poor Abigail. She just like, she really needs you, and the kids need you, and you're just not there. And
she's
like
handling a lot.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that it's a I guess rock and a hard place is the best way that I can say it. So
yep. Over the past year, John had begun pushing for independence and acting as though independence had already been declared. This was in contrast to what people in the colonies had previously wanted. This became a turning point for Abigail, who henceforth would reflect her husband's political issues and opinions, but take it to an extreme. On November 12th, after Abigail listened to a prayer from her local reverend for reconciliation between colonists and the crown, Abigail went home and wrote in a letter to John. She said she could not join, quote, in the petitions of our worthy parson for a reconciliation between our no longer parent state, like England's no longer our parent, but tyrant state, and these colonies. Let us separate. So she was like, okay, I'm over it. Let's move on.
So, and more or less, this preacher that she went to was like, no, we need to be loyal. And she was like, okay,
like,
that's
no,
it. I'm out of here.
over it. Yeah. Or he wasn't like, we need to be loyal. He was like, I hope we can reconcile. And she's like, we're past that.
We got to get, okay, gotcha.
And this, I don't have like more specific examples right now, but this is supposed to be like, whatever John said, she would be like, yes, yes. Like she would be like really into it.
She was a cheerleader.
Yeah, she was like a serious cheerleader, but she would question him a lot. And I think I might have mentioned, or maybe I didn't in the first episode, that like he wouldn't do or publish things without her looking at it and giving it the A-OK, though. I
think you briefly mentioned that. Yeah.
So this is kind of the beginning of that real serious partnership.
Cool.
Luckily, because of John's status, Abigail was invited to a lot of fancy, important dinners. One such dinner was also attended by, remember, Charles Lee, the British defector who turned American
Who's
patriot?
second to Georgie Boy.
Yep. Who Abigail didn't really have a great opinion of. So awkwardly, a letter between John and James Warren, their friend, had recently been intercepted and published.
Uh-oh.
In the letter, it was discussed that Abigail and John were kind of annoyed with Lee's infatuation with his hunting dogs.
Uh-oh.
Lee had some good humor about it, though. He actually had the dog present at the party, and he had the dog lift his paw to Abigail for her to shake.
That's a trained little puppy dog.
Abigail said, quote, I could not do other ways than accept it. I had to take his paw.
I mean, I'm sorry. If a dog goes to shake your hand, you shake it.
I know. And Lee replied that he was eager to present the dog to Abigail. He said, Madam, this is the dog that John Adams has rendered famous.
That's great.
Now, small spoiler, a little bit of squirrel. Apparently, John and Abigail were dog lovers and also cats and other things.
Animal lovers.
Animal lovers. Later on, as the first occupants of the White House, because Washington oversaw the building of it but never lived there, and they were the first ones to occupy the White House, they brought their 2 mixed breed dogs along to live with them. They were named Satan and Juno.
Hell yeah.
And they were the first canine residents of the White House.
I love that they have a dog named Satan.
Yeah, I didn't get any details about why they were named Satan, but like Juno's a god. I don't know. I just thought that was funny. I mean, they're really like well read, and like there's a lot of like mythology and like references to anyway. So
no, it's totally, it's just great. I love it.
I wonder if Satan was like kind of like a surly dog.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's, like tongue in cheek kind of a thing. Like
no,
if you named your dog Demon, it's like, well, come on.
They are very, very like funny. I think they're just sarcastic and funny people.
I would hope that there was an element to it where like they also knew that like if they ever had the preacher come over and they were like, this is our dog Satan, there'd be like a little bit of like, it's funny.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll learn more about Satan and Juno as we progress on. That was later, but
That's funny, though.
When I saw the dog thing, I was like, I wonder about if they had dogs. Anyway, I'm surely they had dogs on their farm too.
Oh yeah.
Okay. In January 1776, it's an important year.
And I'm proud to be an American.
Thank you. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was published, and it was instrumental in advancing the cause of independence in the colonies. Funny enough, John was ambivalent about it.
Really? That's surprising.
He liked the, quote, clear, simple, concise style, but thought it was too radically democratic and would destroy British colonial establishment, but wouldn't provide a strong working solution to these problems.
The swing and a miss there, John.
I don't know. He wrote his own response too, which I almost got into that, but like, whatever. Yeah. Abigail ignored his criticisms of Common Sense, saying that the pamphlet, quote, is highly prized here and carries conviction whenever it is read. I have spread it as much as it lay in my power. So she was like running around with Common Sense being like, have you read this?
I was going to say, I think she saw it for what it was. And John was like, whoa, this is a little too extreme.
Yes. Well, and regardless of John's opinion, Common Sense had a significant impact on public opinion, sparking widespread support for independence across the colonies. It strengthened the colonists' resolve and inspired many to join the patriot cause.
Cool.
In March of 1776, the Continental Army ended the British occupation of Boston, and with this, Abigail had a sense that anything was possible. They won Boston back.
Heck yeah.
On March 31st, she sat down to write what some consider her most significant contribution to women in history, the Remember the Ladies letter. It's funny because this author has referenced the Remember the Ladies letter like 15 times already. And he's like, oh, and when she gets to that, and I was like, okay, so I'm going to get to this letter eventually. And I finally did.
I'm a little embarrassed to say that I do not remember.
I don't remember the ladies. I didn't remember the Remember Ladies. Anyway, but we'll learn about it. In the letter, Abigail told John to think about the women while the delegates were making massive long-term decisions about the new country that they were trying to build. She essentially said, hey, don't forget about us. She called for women to have rights and be treated fairly in one of the earliest calls for women's rights in America. The letter is a bit long, so I'm taking just a few lines out of order. The full letter I've linked to on the website. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I'm throwing in, when you read something in the newspaper and it's like but when you're reading it the way you're reading it, you put like in brackets
you put it into context and make it work.
So anyway, I'm going to go through some of this and then we're going to explain a little bit and then go through a little bit more. Okay. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands capitalized. There's a lot of capitalization in nouns that she writes.
It's interesting.
Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by laws in which we have no voice or representation. They did say that was a little bit sarcasm, like she's not going to really revolt, but
it's still metal. Abigail's metal.
Yeah. That your sex ought to willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. And so remember, they call each other friend, my dearest friend. So when she said all men would be tyrants if they could, that was taken directly from a classical, like, Republican maxim that John had once referenced in one of his ladies. So she was kind of referencing him, referencing something else. So that was a little bit maybe to stroke his ego a little bit. Like you said,
I've been
this
paying
once
attention.
before. She said, quote, men of sense abhor those customs, willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. This was a reference to her beloved sensibility, because she said men of sense. And remember, sensibility was that kind of like movement that she was really into. And letting John off the hook, because since she called him friend in her letter, she's like, you're not one of these men, you're a friend, but like they need to give up the title of master for the one that you've taken, which is friend.
Really quickly, I will say it's been interesting. I've been, and I could be a little bit wrong about the core of this word, but the term gentleman was brought about way back in the day, literally for this kind of purpose, which was there was a point where men were not gentle. So we are now going to make the declaration that we are gentle men. We are not going to go and, do terrible, disgusting things.
We're not going to be like Viking warriors.
We're not going to rape and pillage, but we are going to do things respectfully. So it feels very much like Abigail is really just speaking to that and saying, hey, if we're going to progress further,
remember
that. Remember us. We want to be a part of that too. And I think that's awesome.
So the letter also had strong denunciations of slavery, saying the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have become accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of their, and then I would say liberty. Like if you're wanting to deprive your fellow man of liberty, that's not good. Of this, I'm certain that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing to others as we would that others should do unto us. So she references the golden rule, and she's like, get rid of slavery too. She's a bit ahead of her time.
Dude, I was going to say, this is like 100 years before this should have been written about by most people's standards. It's crazy. Yeah.
John responded to Abigail's letter with a mixture of seriousness and humor. While he acknowledged her points about women's rights and the need for equality, he also expressed skepticism about the idea of granting women greater political rights. In his reply, dated April 14th, so 2 weeks later, John famously wrote, I cannot but laugh. We have been told that our struggle has loosened the bonds of government everywhere, meaning what we're doing is like great. But your letter was the first intimation that another tribe more numerous and powerful than all the rest were grown discontented.
Whoa.
This is the first time I'm aware that you guys are frustrated.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
He also said, quote, I love this. Our masculine systems are little more than theory. We dare not exert our power in its full latitude. We are obliged to go fair and softly. In practice, we are the subjects, only the name of masters, meaning you're the boss.
I mean, hey, good wordsmithing, buddy, but I know what he's trying to say, and I appreciate it. But, buddy, hear what Abigail is saying.
That's the other thing. While he may have been that way, so many other men were not.
Yes.
And so that's hard. I think that's when we think about putting ourselves in other people's shoes, we have to think about the people who maybe don't have a voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if we are evolved, maybe other people are not. So I thought that was interesting.
Very.
Now, despite his humor, John recognized the importance of Abigail's concerns and engaged in a thoughtful dialogue with her on the topic of women's rights for years. I mean, for the entirety of their marriage. Abigail replied on May 7th, I cannot say that I think you are very generous to the ladies. Now, regardless of this letter, again, a continuation of the back and forth that the two had about women's rights and slavery, and like they continue to talk about this and affect some change over the course of their lives. Now, in many ways, it was true what John said about being masters in name only. In 1776, in the midst of the war, wages soared and supplies dwindled. British goods were boycotted. Abigail was alone in Braintree, and she had to make decisions. She made one to hire a full-time farm manager despite the cost. So it said that hiring someone to run your farm on your behalf was like very expensive.
Yeah.
But she couldn't do it.
Right.
She had a lot of stuff going on. So she just did it. She had to make rather than buy clothes. And she worked with her friend Mercy Warren to exchange textiles. They found a weaver that they hired.
Wow.
The weaver was a German guy, and he would often run out of pins. And Abigail would have John procure pins from
Like,
Philadelphia.
buddy,
for him.
I got you covered.
I got you covered. So I think there was a lot of like bartering happening.
I mean, it's really cool to hear about.
Yeah.
Like, it's, I don't know. For me, when I think about history, this is not the stuff that I get to hear about ever. Is you hear about the Revolutionary War, the politics of it, the battles, all these things, but I don't hear about what it took for the normal people that weren't fighting to just get by and survive and live, and what that work looked like. You know, really cool to hear.
Yeah. Well, regardless of the laws of the time, the lack of change, Abigail kept the children fed and clothed, saying she did, quote, as much as she could to manufacture clothing for her family, which would else be naked. So with all of that, we're going to end our episode here.
Oh, okay.
It's the spring of 1776 on the eve of very big changes. The eve of the Declaration of Independence.
I'm mad at you because I was really thinking we were going to get to it in this episode. So
No, this felt like a tipping point.
okay.
And a good place to stop. And so we're gonna hold off until next time.
Okay.
And just like words wise, this is like as many as a normal episode. So I don't know if you were just really engaged. And you're like,
maybe. I look, any time that we get into like any topic that is, it's weird. I don't know if you're the same way as me, but there are times that I get very surprised at the things that I am the most fascinated by. Right.
Yeah.
Where like I'll have it in my head that, oh, I'm really interested in this thing. And I'll read into it. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. But then I'll find out something else and go, I didn't realize that I was so interested in this subject. So getting into like early and pre-Revolutionary War, the build up to it in America, it's really, really interesting. And you even said something that I went, oh, whoa, that's a weird way to think about it, which is you said something along the lines of the British seeing themselves get plunged into civil war.
oh yeah.
And it's
Which
like,
we never think about it that way.
no, we think about it as like, yeah, this is when America started. This is when we decided we've had enough and we're getting out of here. And it's an interesting comparison to think about the Civil War in America 60 some odd years later.
The same way.
It didn't end the same way, and that's my point. Is that
it wouldn't have even been called a civil war if it had ended this way.
Exactly.
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
So if we were looking at the Civil War in the 1800s, 1860, and if the South had won, we wouldn't call it the Civil War. We would call it the Southern War of Independence.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a very cool thing. And it's right back to your saying, if John Adams had gotten dysentery and died, the littlest things that could have changed that would have made it all totally different. So it's just a really interesting thought to think of it as the British saw it as a civil war. We saw it as a war for independence. It's pretty cool to think about, you know?
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I just think it's really interesting. And then I just think back, I like try to visualize like what it must have looked like and a lot of mud. It's funny in my head though, like I do think of in Monty Python when they're going through and they're like, she's a witch, and they're like in that town. That's what I'm visualizing Braintree as for some reason.
I actually think about it as when he's going through the fields and she's like, oh, Dennis, there's some lovely filth over here.
There's lovely filth over here.
We live in a narco-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as sort of ambassador for the week. But they're literally collecting piles of filth.
Yes.
And so it's like, it kind of reminds me of that. And it's like,
that's what
the colonies are just getting started, so the work is dirty and gross. But they're all somehow really aware of the political situation at large.
Well, and the other thing that's kind of... That is pretty funny.
Right?
The other thing that's kind of funny too, though, is like we think about this, but then like all these guys were Harvard educated. So like Harvard was around.
I know, it's wild.
It's like super crazy. There was no electricity, but Harvard was there.
I know. It is a weird thing to think about, man.
I don't know. My favorite part of this episode was just when the British got to Cambridge, and they're like, which way to Concord? They're like, oh, we don't know. I'm not sure.
I love it. And then it's like collectively Cambridge all together. We're like, guys, we're going to fuck with them. I don't know. Play dumb. Okay. We have no idea.
We're just academics. We don't study geography. We study philosophy.
It's like weirdly passive aggressive, and I love it.
I thought that was pretty funny.
It's pretty great. All right. Well, anything else you want to wrap up with here?
Nope. I think I'm good. I think that Abigail was a saucy lady.
Dude, I'm into it, man. I mean, I had very little, but some inclination as to who Abigail Adams was, but it was not this.
Yeah.
It was not nearly as, I mean, she does it in a cool way, but in a very powerful way, right? Of being able to be like, hey, here's what I think. Here's what's what. Here's stand up for women. Don't forget us. Make sure this. But in this very like, I was just watching Ocean's 11 the other day, and it's like all those, or at least Clooney and Brad Pitt, they just have this way of just being like classy, but still a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? I get the same vibe off of Abigail.
Yeah.
It's like that coolness, but that ability to be like, hey, look, I'm pretty brilliant, but I'm not going to go shouting about it necessarily.
Yeah,
like it's very cool. It's very
well. The person I think of is my late Mimi, because Mimi would just she would just like say stuff, and she'd be like, I can just hear her going, oh Lord. Like I can just hear Abigail, like John saying something and her like rolling her eyes. I can just see her doing that. And that's kind of what she definitely had a lot of opinions. She was very articulate.
Yes.
And she was very resourceful, and he definitely picked the right lady to yeah.
She's I don't know if this sounds strange because maybe it's just the people of the time or whatever, but I'm sort of surprised at how great of a writer she is. Not just like a good writer, but like I pretty great writer.
No, I know some of the things she says. You're like, Now,
right? Like
I did read one other thing that said at the time. It to me like the word what they were saying almost bordered on like plagiarism, but like they would often reference other works, like very commonly. But
Sure.
some of these things are like, but also think about it. Like when you text your friend and you make a joke, it just sounds more. I'm not saying she wasn't a good writer. I'm saying she was an excellent writer. But like, we're witty. We say funny things. She's saying funny things. It just is kind of disguised in this like old English. And it's just, I don't know. It's cool. It's cool.
Well, to be honest with you, it doesn't surprise me they would be quoting things. I'm assuming things like Shakespeare constantly because.
Whereas we quote Monty Python and Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yes, but I should read more Shakespeare.
And The Office.
But it is one of those situations, though, where Shakespeare had a great, if we think that Shakespeare was just one guy, he had a great way of insulting people in a very wordy way that made you have to go, wait, what?
Did I just get insulted?
Well, yeah, exactly. You had to like Winston Churchill, I think, was probably a huge Shakespeare fan because he was one of the best ever to insult you, and you didn't know it until 10 minutes later where you went, oh, shoot, you actually said this, and I didn't realize it because he was just so good at using his words in very eloquent kind of ways. Anyhow, though, it actually, really quick, I'll say about this with Shakespeare, too, is that they've done, running through computers, basically. They've gone through all of Bob Dylan's work and have found that it's like 90% of it can be traced back in some way to basically like his senior year of high school in an accelerated English program where he was reading overwhelming amounts of Shakespeare.
Interesting.
So like so much of like Bob Dylan, the jesters in the courtyard banging in the like all of this is these like Shakespearean ideas and sort of like phrasings that he just absorbed and was able to then kind of like rebarf it out as this sort of like American folky poetry. But it all came from Shakespeare. Pretty fascinating.
I think that's pretty cool. And I think that Abigail Adams and Bob Dylan have that in common.
Hey, man, when you find Shakespeare, he's the man. All right. Well, I guess we wrap it up here.
Yes, I think so.
We'll just do one quick little shout out today. I always like to give it to my buddy Akiva. Everybody, if you're looking for any type of metalworking, specifically, I would say the kind of specialty here is going to be for things like chef's knives, whether that be 8-inch chef's knives, 6-inch chef's knives, K-tip chef's knives, Santokus, whatever it is that you're looking for, whatever you can dream up and think up, go and check out metalworkbymiola.com. Again, that's metalwork by Miola, MEOLA.com. If you use the code biographers at checkout, you are going to get 10% off of your order, and you're going to help support an awesome local knife maker as well, who's also a personal friend of mine, one of my best buds. So again, check that out. That's metalworkbymiola.com. Use the code biographers at checkout to get 10% off. That's not what I'm going to do today. Aubrey, anything else you want to say or shout out or anything before we wrap it up? Yeah.
No, I just was thinking about like veiled insults.
Okay.
And I saw one. I love how you don't care how you come across.
I've heard some other ones too, but I can never remember them because I never have the instinct to say those types of things to people, you know?
I wish I was as cool as you are about all this clutter.
That's just like backhanded.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Like always, again, we're continuing to see a pretty cool response from people, and I will say keep the feedback coming. Even if your reviews come in and they're, you have something to tell us or whatever, we actually are reading them right now. To this point because we don't have millions and millions of reviews coming in. So we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback. If there's something that just drives you insane, or if our audio is weird and you got a better suggestion, hey, look, reach out to us. Check out the biographerspodcast at gmail.com, or I should say just email us there. I think that's probably it, right? Anything else?
I think that's it.
Cool. Thanks for joining, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.